All right. Okay. Now we're on. We're on. Well, I guess I'll start bringing some people in, huh?
Shuffle our friends in, would you?
Yeah, it's 8:00. Let's admit number one. We've got the only Mike McCabe that I know.
Oh,
Mike McCabe.
I know one Mike McCabe.
You know one Mike McCabe?
Oh, you know what? That's him. Never mind.
Same
That's
guy.
the Mike McCabe that I know. That's
Same
the
one
one.
you know. Let's see if we've got an Andrew. Do you know any Andrews?
I know one Andrew. Well, I know one Andrew Carlson.
Okay, one Andrew Carlson.
Yeah.
Survey
Is it the same?
says ...
I'm getting an Andrew.
Andrew?
Andrew?
Yes.
It is.
Oh, I was
Oh, he thought we were the
nice.
FBI.
Yeah,
right.
no, not a bad call. Every time I do anything, I think they should be covering that camera, and I'm not.
Better safe than sorry.
No, I'm with you. I was thinking about it just yesterday.
There's a Will Elmer in
Will.
the house.
Hello,
Howdy.
Emily Kubiak.
Hello.
Hello. Hi.
Awesome.
How are you?
Doing well. I was trying to connect a face and name, and I was having a gap. And then as soon as I saw a new face, I got excited, and I thought that must be Emily.
It's me.
Perfect.
It's good to see all your faces.
All
I
of
got
these
my
faces.
nickname up. I'll put my real name.
Oh, yeah. We were just having some fun with that. I think a previous one, everyone put my name as their name, and it was most.
We're all named Jeff. It's just all of our first names.
Plausible.
I question it.
So let's see here. I think we've got a hidden Anna and a Nathan Butcher.
Okay, all right.
All right, we got some new faces today.
Welcome, new faces. Well, one new face and one non-video participant face.
Right.
Hey guys, yeah, the video's not working on my.
Hi, Hannah.
I'm here.
Welcome, Jeff's new drink.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that, everyone.
Yeah,
I
Jeff.
have been famously drinking very rambunctious fruit cocktail smoothies, if you
Out
like.
of a big gulp cup from 2008, it seems.
It's actually a free Planned Parenthood cup from a fun run from the Max Higbee Center, but I didn't do the fun run. I need to make sure everyone knows that I don't actually fun run. I ran out of rum and I almost ran to the store to get it because I thought, like, what if these have only worked at all because I had a delicious fruit smoothie beverage to accompany me. And we're going out on a limb here, Nathan. Now that we've drawn attention to it, after I've drawn attention to it, it's stressful, but we're going to get through. I'm going to unzip.
I was hoping you'd unzip. Wynn Buckley sends her regards and says that she wishes she could be here, but her love of what's that?
Got too spooked out.
It wasn't that. Her love of books destroyed a bookshelf, and she's cleaning up right now. So, hi, Wynn.
Hi, Wynn.
I think you're watching, and we miss you. And maybe we'll see you for next week's volume 4 of East of West.
I hope that none of your books got ruined.
Yeah. Geez, I hope you can find a new bookshelf in the coronavirus land.
Ryan Russell, friend of the show, friend of the shop, friend of everything, just got a new calyx today. So, IKEA bookshops inspired by the comics place.
You called someone else
Jesse.
friends of the show, and so Andrew just gets up and leaves. He needs to be the only one.
Yeah, I guess we need to talk about how versatile of a phrase that is. I'm going to open the window because it's getting hot.
I think Andrew is the friend of the show. I think everybody else could be a pal of the show. He could be.
See,
the
I got
Pots.
pal of the show last week, and I was curious about that. I was a little bit jealous of the friend of the show.
Okay, well, I guess Ryan could be the buddy of the show, the bots.
We got a hierarchy.
Just good buds. Just, a real pal,
comrade of the show of the show. And a sort of Russian theme.
So speaking of a theme, we're talking about Ice Cream Man Volume 1.
Everybody hold up those glorious pastel comic books that we've all got. Oh, how cool. I was really excited that everyone voted for this one because it is a book that we've talked about, Andrew could confirm, but probably like 60 to 70% of the issues on the podcast. It's one of like our sort of favorite shop books.
I'd be surprised if it isn't 100% of the issues to some extent.
Yeah, there's like a couple I haven't read. I hadn't read one of these. Ice Cream Man, one of the only books that can come out and I can get like 2 or 3 pages in and be like, oh, this is not a Jeff book. This is clearly a very high quality book, but this one is going to make me feel like I'm swimming through the ashes of another life. And I'm not emotionally prepared for that all the time. So I'm curious, was this anybody's first introduction to Ice Cream Man?
Yes.
Jesse, Will. Okay, other people had checked in at different times on different things.
I think it was Hannah's first. She said that she had read the Image first at some point.
Yes. Yep. This is my first introduction to it. It's interesting.
I cannot imagine. I guess like trying to think back on when this comic book started coming out, we were all really excited about it. For some reason, I think most of our excitement was rooted around Ashton for some reason. Yeah. Like it was just sort of like Ashton, who the youngest employee at the comics place. I'm not sure why, but there seemed to be this like there's a ooky wholesomeness to this book, at least from afar. And then it came out, and I guess I think it's a super bold book because these first 4 issues, like you don't necessarily know what this series is about from the first issue. You don't really even know. Well, I mean, there's 16 issues, and we don't really know what this book for sure is about. But it's just like it's kind of one of the few books that's been allowed to find its footing as it has been coming out. Which in an industry so rooted on sales figures and order quantities, like not often does it seem like things get this much time to develop what they are.
I have some interesting breaking news for everyone. I think maybe we've been doing this to no audio on Facebook. So
every time.
Well, no, just now.
Okay. I was gonna say that's fine, but that is a month of different than I thought.
Why didn't anybody tell us?
No one was ever watching. That's how we assume all the time.
So I guess if we vamp for just a minute, I think our tech guy will get on that. Fingers crossed.
Like heavy makeup.
Yep. Okay. Yep. Yeah. Vampires.
I'm gonna watch Spinal Tap this week as long as we're talking about it.
Oh, he says it's fine, so we're good.
Oh, okay, never mind. We'll put a pin in that one and come back to it later. I've got a whole like pocket full of conversations to just start.
Of course. Hey, you mentioned that it took a minute to find. Well, it still hasn't found its footing in some ways because we don't know what it's about. But how are the like sales numbers for it in general or in the store compared to? I don't know. It clearly still sells.
Yeah, it is one of like, I don't know, Django, maybe 10% of books like defy the trend of like generally having fewer sales. Issue 1 is the highest. Issue 2 can be anywhere from like half to 75%. Issue 3, like there's a general attrition rate to most series. This one, I think like we sold out of number 2 for sure. I think like I hadn't read one of the issues in this because we didn't have enough of them. So when we do our orders, we have to kind of assume there is going to be an attrition rate, and we don't want to have a whole bunch of extra copies of like 3 if we don't have any number 1s. So yeah, we sold out of 1s, sold out of 2s. It probably wasn't until like issue 4 or 5 that we started having 1s on the shelf. We didn't order huge quantities of it, but it definitely, and then to this day, like we sell huge numbers of the paperbacks, or at least more than most Image books. I would say of the Image paperbacks of the last like 2 years, this is probably top 3 or 4. Django, would you say?
Yeah, probably. It also helps that we are all huge fans of it. And whenever somebody says, what's a good horror comic? Like I'll start them with this or Gideon Falls or like Lock and Key if we have it in stock. Those are kind of my go-to horror books. And this one is just so good because you don't have to read it linear. You can kind of dip in and out. And that gets more and more true as the series goes. I'm sure we'll talk about that when we're discussing the individual issues, but you could give somebody any single issue of this series and it's a self-contained meal. And they don't need any context, and they might miss out on a couple little references to something, but nothing that matters for that story. So it's a great jumping on point at any point of the series.
I don't know if we want to get into this in a minute or now, but one thing on my mind with this series is I thought it's a really interesting counterpoint to East of West, which I think a thing that we've said all along with East of West is like, man, this works really well in trade paperback. Like it would have been really difficult to read issue by issue. This I don't think is at all bad in collection, but wow. I sat and read this all in one sitting, and it was like I went through an emotional, like, you're sitting there questioning your relationship with your father, and like if you took too many painkillers when you got your wisdom teeth out, and like just all of these like really existential, like gross thoughts. And I was like, am I in the right relationship? Do I like my job? Like what? And it's the kind of thing that I think works really well. Like once a month you get a single issue that's going to take you on a really, really dark ride. But there's a number of series like Stray Bullets is one that I mentioned earlier today, that are just like so raw that I just can't really read them in a collection. So it just seemed like an interesting counterpoint to the conversations we've been having of like, well, this is a great example of a thing that almost I think works way better separated by a month, because I got to rebuild the callus of my emotions before I can break it down.
Yeah, it's almost too much when you're reading them all. I had the same kind of reaction with Stray Bullets and also Walking Dead. Like only 3 or 4 issues of bleakness, and then I need a break.
And that's for sorry, please.
It's for a different reason than Planetary, because Planetary was it's not like you can't read them in succession. That was our example of like, that's a really good self-contained meal situation. But yeah, this one is content-wise restrictive, maybe for
I'm
and it
curious,
takes away from it too. When you have like, you should think about this very disturbing thing to the maximum amount that your brain can think about it, and then you go to another different 10 that's also disturbing, and you're supposed to bring it kind of smooths everything out a little too much, maybe.
Yeah, you get a little desensitized.
Yeah, you guys you made the comparison, I think before one of you guys did, to being kind of like Black Mirror, and that's kind of what I get stuck in my head a little bit. And it's the exact same thing. Watching Black Mirror was like, you can't binge watch that show. You got to watch an episode and then be depressed for a week. Then you might be ready for another episode. And so it's a good little spot to fill in. But just to counter your point, like, I think at least for the first volume, I enjoyed reading it all in one sitting, because it kind of introduced me to the concept of what's happening in each of the issues, as opposed to just reading one issue and saying, okay, what's this about? Like, this first issue was interesting and captivating, but what's this really about? As opposed to being able to read all of them at once. And just like you, Jeff, I read it in one sitting, super fast. And I don't typically read that way. I mean, I sometimes don't finish a single comic issue in one sitting, because I just don't have the time to do it. But this, I like sat down on the couch for like 45 minutes before dinner, and it was done by the time dinner was ready. And that doesn't happen very often.
And it wasn't just because it created such an emotional black hole that you like physically couldn't get off of the couch.
Time slowed down.
Sort of the experience I had.
A bit of that, like, it was kind of, each story just kind of like sticks with you, I guess. And so it was like just sitting there eating dinner, and just like it's all just bouncing around in your head, and going to bed that night, you just keep thinking about it and open it up. That was at least my experience. Like, I kept just kind of rethinking all the stories, and none of them were terribly overly complicated, but I just kind of couldn't get it out of my head.
I think a thing that works.
They're disturbing I think they're disturbing in like really distinct ways. So it's like pushing like 5 different buttons at once, and like how much can you take?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Each issue has been like, gosh, the dude is. We should mention this is written by W. Maxwell Prince with art by Martin Morazzo. But he's just like he's like a surgeon for different like types of emotions that are like all in like I would just lump it as like the kind of sad emotional spectrum. He's like, oh no, this is loss for a loved one that you never quite fully knew. He's like, this is one is just deep drug addiction. Like it's a I don't know. It's super. and that's also sort of illustrated as more issues that have gone on. Like it's a lot of different types of ground that has been covered in this one. For me, the couple issue 2, like the heroin addiction issue, is just like, that is just, as anybody who like snuck out of the house and started smoking weed without their parents know, you're always like, God, I hope I don't end up like these two characters in this comic book I'm reading for fun. Like, it was just like, it's a total trigger for me. So I'm curious, what were other people's favorite issues, or the ones that like struck them as maybe the most disturbing?
Hey, Jeff Ellipsis, Figley Ellipsis, do you want to give your patented little overview of just your back of the first trade type thing?
Hey, you got 70 seconds.
Sure.
Or less.
So the nature of this book has sort of slowly unveiled itself, I think, to the readers throughout the 16 issues, but it's kind of a bunch of one-shot stories that illustrate that this white ice cream man, like white-clad universal force, essentially, goes into a town, and just his presence sort of causes reality to sort of curdle around the edges. And these are all instances of how the reality is interacting in response to his presence. And at the end of this volume, we meet the Cowboy in Black, who is sort of the opposing universal force in terms of how I think about it, which is sort of a force of order or structure that exists simultaneous to this sort of force of almost like entropy or chaos that is the Ice Cream Man. So yeah, I don't know if that sort of does it, but it's sort of just a one-shot stories of how, I guess, yeah, I always think like the reality is sort of curdling and drying and cracking around the edges as this chaotic force has its way with our lives.
So just taking this volume 1 as its own thing, I think it's really interesting to see how, in my mind, the creators probably thought that they would get 4 to 6 issues, and it was a huge hit. And I think that they didn't expect to be able to keep going. And there's 18 or 20 issues out at this point. And I think that the direction and the thrust of the series has changed quite a bit, just in that there are, other than the man in the Cowboy Man in Black and the Ice Cream Man, there really aren't recurring characters like we see in issues 1 and 2, where in issue 1 there's the detective who shows up in issue 2, and I don't think that happens ever again. I think that everything is pretty self-contained with these evils, maybe some themes and maybe some background things still happening across issues, but there aren't characters that span issues in the same way. I think, Jeff, you were saying that the one that got you was the drug one. I think that the 3 and 4 were the ones that got me. The one about definitely not old fat Buddy Holly, and the one about the dad who lost his son.
Yeah,
such a good issue.
Yeah, I hope that W. Maxwell Prince is doing all right. I hope he's doing all right.
Oh, there's something wrong with this guy. He's got spiders in his brain.
I know Roman's only not here because he saw the spider in issue 1 and was like, I don't mess around with that at all. Yeah, the music one is really interesting as well, because that one is like, gosh, it's a little bit less overtly depressing, or I don't know, like at times some of these issues of Ice Cream Man are kind of like dark adventure stories rather than kind of nightmarish meditations on the human condition.
Right.
But is
that's what I thought too. The music one was really trippy, while the other ones felt a little more real almost.
Yeah.
And just like that realistic raw feeling of Black Mirror, but the music one was like trippy to me, like some vivid nightmare, like you said, nightmare.
Yeah, I was going to say that when, we're talking about 2 and how just straight on dark, depressing on a very human level that is, it was kind of good decision to follow that up with an issue that was essentially a bit of escapist fantasy, albeit a bittersweet and, very personal one.
Yeah.
But it's mostly got positive beats. It's what makes it bittersweet is
Right.
how it's all that this guy wants, but it's all a dream and it's all gone at the end. I think that that on the spectrum of sadness, it's good to go from just absolute despair to a sort of milder despair.
What a killer third issue to have after you kind of set the stage in these 1 and 2 with just how the very first thing that's so gross is just finding the kid's dead parents in there in issue 1, and then issue 2 is gross and it's weird and it's awful, and then just you get put into this like almost like a better crafted comic in the generic sense of it, with what he accomplishes, and that's so cool. And that it happens so quickly, and then you kind of go right back to the weirdness that it was for a second, but it isn't just a one-trick pony comic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. I thought it was interesting the contrast between each one, but still had the underlying like horror in there too. Mm-hmm. But the contrast between the different issues was really interesting, kind of going on for yet another ride.
Seems like it's kind of in their mission statement where they're talking about the different ice cream flavors. Like, there's a flavor for everyone's misery.
Yeah,
and that
yeah,
was
I thought
what
that was interesting.
Yeah, I was just trying to flip through and find that line of just like everyone is sad, and I couldn't remember if that was in the first issue or not. But that's sort of like the mission statement of the whole series is like everyone's bummed out about something, and we're gonna find all of it. Come along, and it's like, oh, that doesn't sound fun at all, but I'll do it.
Come with me, I'll bum you out.
Yeah. I think that I can't remember if it's volume 2 or like volume 3. I think it's maybe volume 2 is like my favorite of the series so far. But it is interesting that like you're saying, there's issue 2, which is this incredibly human one, but there are some like very not absurdist, but like surrealist issues in this series as it goes on, like very much more like meditations on a feeling and sort of sitting and playing in a feeling. And I guess I oftentimes in these issues thinking I either know exactly what he's talking about, like the drug addiction one, or like, just what were they getting at by that? And it's not a huge number of series where I can like sit there and just be like, what was the issue where they're on the space station and like,
yeah,
in subsequent volumes, like there's some very, very absurdist, surreal ones.
Well, why don't we go issue by issue?
Sure.
And just kind of discuss each one. The first one is about, it introduces the ice cream man as a character who has an ice cream van and gives ice cream and treats to kids, and then has kind of a darker something going on. And he gives ice cream to a kid whose parents aren't around, and we see the kid go back to his house, and his parents are mummified, and I think they've been bitten by this spider Rupert that he's got. And eventually, like, this werewolf attacks the kid, who is also maybe the ice cream man, and the spider gets away, and the cops show up, and like it sets up a lot of things that never really pay off, but it's a really interesting first introduction to the whole thing.
I want to know why I have no idea why I'm supposed to have no grasp on what's going on and also feel these feelings. Like, I don't know what the relationship is between throwing in plot points that literally aren't supposed to make sense, and then also diving down to the deepest parts of my soul. What's the
Can I take that one?
Cohesion there?
Yeah,
please do.
The cohesion is existentialism. It's that these are all events that happen. There is no meaning behind them, though. All that matters is that they happen.
We just went down to a worse level than I thought it was going to be.
Are we talking about East of West?
Yeah, because in a sort of parallel to East of West, everything in East of West has a meaning. Everything is building up towards a predetermined apocalypse. In Ice Cream Man, just bad things happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
it doesn't matter if you're a kid or a couple in love or the one-hit wonder.
But all of these things do happen.
Yeah, and there's no resolution in that first one because the spider's still around at the end of it and gets away, and parents are just dead. The spider got turned into
Does the spider get turned
yeah,
into cream?
An ice cream cone, yeah.
Right, which is very Kafkaesque. Like again, that's not supposed to make any sense either.
Yeah,
I want it to so badly. I want it to.
And
right, but life doesn't have great solutions, and that's kind of the point of the existentialist horror in it.
Yeah,
and like such. No, go Jeff.
Well, I was just gonna say it. I think if you, as this series goes on, there are many issues that like touch on experiences many of us have probably had in some way, and to wrap it in a nice bow or to tie it to like a causal reasoning for happening doesn't make it as versatile to you, the reader, as it does if it remains vague. Because I mean, it also doesn't give it the respect necessarily, because you're like, well, you know, my instance of that happening didn't have a causal link. It just happened, you know, and in reality, so many things just happen, and it's a total bummer. But that, you know, to allow it to be the chaos of reality, I don't know, it justifies our own experiences, I would say, a little bit more than if there's a real A, then B, then C type of thing. It made sense, if that makes sense at all.
I kind of liked the spider being turned into an ice cream cone, but because it gave me the idea that the ice cream man is just going to continue messing with things. And he's like, he took the poison that was maybe unrelated to him in the first place and turned it into an ice cream cone to feed a kid. And something terrible is going to happen after that. And he's just kind of working with what he's got. And I don't know if that really follows through or pays off in the long run. I don't think that we've seen like, you know, his actual methods in subsequent issues. But I really like the idea that he took this poisonous thing and passed it on just as part of his being. He's got to bring some more chaos to the world.
I remember being disappointed when the first issue came out that the ice cream man was the force of evil. And I almost like, I love the iconography of him so much that I almost wanted him to be like the reverse role. Like he's the embodiment of purity or innocence. But then I guess that I'm like a sort of 1950s-esque thing that like, you know, purity and innocence beneath the surface of that is, you know, again, reality curling at the surface.
But when I read the first issue, and then throughout reading the rest of the first volume, I just kept comparing it to other things. It's, you know, it's a hard thing to put a pin on. Like, okay, this is what the plot is, so you just end up comparing it to lots of other stuff, and it had a lot of feeling of like early Vertigo. This was like, it feels like Image doing a Vertigo title in a lot of ways. It's, you know, it's got a lot of kind of 90s Hellblazer. It's like the first couple of volumes of Sandman. It's got a lot of those vibes. When you know, Sandman started as a horror comic and then kind of quickly turned into something else. And the type of horror that it used is very similar to the horror that's used in this.
I thought the parents too was when he kept walking in with the parents dead, kind of was evocative of like arachnophobia. I don't know. That movie scared the crap out of me as a kid. Like, I'm not inherently afraid of spiders, but I remember seeing that when I was a kid, and like I remember just somebody dying like in an armchair with spiders crawling all over them, and that's what that brought me back to, that childhood fear that I got from watching that movie specifically. So that got me pretty early on.
I saw that movie years after I read the comic book adaptation. And I know exactly the scene you're talking about, but just from the comic. This issue, actually, if you guys listen to the podcast, this is the issue that made Roman throw a comic across the room and say, "That's not how you sell a fucking comic."
Incorrect. That was Pearl #1.
Really? Oh,
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Well, never mind. Can we take this out? Can we rewind it?
I just didn't want to quote Roman incorrectly with Andrew Carlson, friend of the show here. He's got a spreadsheet, you know. You know,
I'm with Django on this one, but
well, I could be wrong. Let's hey, can
it's your worst nightmare to be wrong.
No, that was in the before times when Jeff used to edit things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This just goes up raw.
It's a lot easier, everybody. It's a lot easier.
Crank this stuff out now.
What I thought was interesting in the first issue was like the absurdity of the werewolf nature of Ice Cream Man. It seems like a thing that would maybe get followed up, or is this a character trait? And it's, 21 issues in or something. We've never seen hide nor hair of his ability to turn into a werewolf again, or even like his need to. Like, it doesn't seem super predictable. Like his ice cream outfit's been ripped. You can't. It's his ice cream outfit.
Yeah, you guys were talking about like which is the most like marked issue in this one, and I think honestly the first one is for me, both because it has arguably a slightly more happier ending than many of the other ones, if not most of them, and exactly. I mean, the werewolf. We haven't really seen that. It has a lot of loose ends that. I mean, the spiders have come back, and there's some other things, but there were a lot of things that are unanswered still that I think are very interesting.
How'd the spider even get in the town, and how'd the kid get the spider? Like, I was always wondering if that was the Ice Cream Man or if he was just kind of witnessing this weird tragedy. That was kind of pointless.
Yeah, but so often with this series, we never get any like logical. It's just sort of like, hey, we're going to start you on chapter 3. And it's like, okay, I guess I'm just going to get used to but yeah, like where the spider came from, or does it ever come back again? Like they could easily tie some sort of causality to a lot of the events that happened here.
So, spiders are a recurring theme, though.
I know there's a giant spider in volume 3.
Yeah, that's true. Jesse, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, as an arachnophobic, I was just wondering if he was going to sell that ice cream, that spider they turned into an ice cream to anybody.
Jesse's like, I'm never getting ice cream again if this is a risk.
Not.
Yeah.
This is not okay.
Yeah.
Happened to you. No.
Yeah, I don't need ice cream anymore. I'm like,
as of today. Yeah.
So well, he also said Rupert was afraid of or didn't like humans
or adults.
Or adults, I'm sorry. Yeah, he didn't like adults, and he was like, because the kid's walking around with it on his back, like, oh, it's my pet spider, but it's like killed my parents.
Yeah, that's
I'm like, well, the adult thing was interesting. Is that going to come around again?
So
it
maybe
also doesn't like werewolves.
Yeah, maybe he serves it to a kid for a new pet, for new parents, new mummified parents.
Yeah, so we're adults, we're all screwed. But if you're a kid, you're fine.
Yeah, and I wonder if that was just sort of the delusion of the child. Like, did he just perceive it that way, or does this spider actually have a proclivity for children? Like, it's just an interesting, like, what if? Okay, I guess I'll just think about that.
It doesn't mean anything still.
Yeah,
like, it
true.
Doesn't,
yeah, it doesn't answer anything.
Yeah,
it's so like I get what Mike's saying completely, and that actually opens up this series to me a little bit more. And at the same time, I don't like relying on that because when you get into something like issue 2, that is so real and heartfelt and nuts. And then with other things that don't make sense surrounding it, and with it having an existential basis, it's like, okay, well, you're forcing me to think that nothing matters, yet invest my soul in these broken people.
You can't help it.
That's kind of the existentialist, kind of the other edge of the sword, really, is that, if there's no greater meaning to existence, then all there is existence, and therefore it is of the utmost importance.
Yeah, gosh.
Yeah. Nathan, I'm thinking about how the second issue is the only one where there's sort of, you see natural consequences of someone's actions. Like maybe to the older couple, they don't know what they did to deserve that, but you do see that in this drug addicted couple, like the things that are happening kind of follow from what they started, but that's not really a theme in any of the other issues.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm sort of going through the Ice Cream Mans in my head, and how many, it seems like the vast majority of them do sort of come back to some sort of supernatural interference or something. But in reality, yeah, like this really is just the brutal consequences of, addiction and that disease.
There's like 2 spots where the Ice Cream Man was kind of giving her a little bit of a push, but that's about it. Like whether the ice cream truck was conveniently left sitting unattended right where it was, and then obviously with the drugs at the end. So it was still involved, but you're right. There was lots and lots of choice that was involved in both of those things. Her choice to steal the truck, and then her choice on what to do with the drugs.
Maybe he is drugs.
Maybe he is drugs.
Did you guys?
Poison.
I'm getting that on a T-shirt.
I didn't read the trade paperback. I read the single issues. Are these patterns included in the trade?
They are,
because every issue has a thematic repeating pattern on the inside, front and back cover, and it's one of my favorite ongoing parts of the whole series.
It's beautiful graphic design.
Yeah.
Between that and the ice cream flavors, I found myself like over analyzing each one. Like, what does this have to do with this? And what about like this title?
Spoiler alert, really nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, right? That's
well, so then Nathan, I'm curious, is that like, how do you feel about that? Like I'm pretty comfortable waiting in the existential, just sort of like, of it all. Mike seems to be as well. Is that like a turn off for you? Do you like it in spite of that? Like, how is it impacting your relationship with that book? Because it seems like from reading your behavior, you enjoyed it. If I could, psychoanalyze. No, but at the same time, even in our previous discussions, like I do know you like to have a little bit more to roll around in your fingers. So like, where do you sort of clock in with all that, or how does it make you feel?
The existential part of it, and Mike revealing that, as he usually does in these, which is honestly I think one of the greatest parts about this book club, is that I have a pretty low bar for liking something, and then I come here and like it for a new reason, or at least learn something new about it. That's new. This existential thing is like a 9-minute-old thing in my head of like, oh, that's crazy. Like, I already liked these. I can't read them in a row. I didn't read the trade paperback because I had already read the individual 4 like over the course of a couple of months. But I don't know how I feel about that. It won't distract me from reading anything, but in a way it's not comfortable for me. I like seeing like what happened and how big of a deal each of these individual tragedies are, and letting them simmer. And it's probably what sells the book, that it doesn't make me comfortable. And if it was more Spielbergy or Bendis-y or had reasons for things, it wouldn't be this book. And I think I'm excited to read it moving forward, knowing that I don't have to latch on to any plot point that happens outside of somebody being terribly sad. And if a werewolf shows up, I could be like, shit,
it does come back.
Or, so, and I've read like I just read these 4, and then I've bought the All-Star Superman issue and then the silent issue. So I've just read 2 other random ones, and it's sweet, and I'm excited to go back and read those if we end up doing this series more for book club.
See, I had heard nothing about this series until a couple of months ago when I saw the cover that's the parody of the Action Comics Superman cover, and that made me kind of go, oh, what's this? This looks interesting. This looks like a kind of interesting, thinky indie comic, and I'm glad that it is, but it's a little different from what I expected. But the other, to give it more sort of framework, like why I ended up comparing the kind of format of this comic to maybe is things like Twilight Zone, Tales from the Crypt, Erie, Indiana was something that sprung to mind, but because it all takes place in the one town.
I watched that show, buddy.
Yeah.
Outer Limits, maybe.
Outer Limits, sure, yeah. But
Are You Afraid of the Dark? Goosebumps.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So like the Ice Cream Man in the first issue definitely has that very much that Crypt Keeper feel. He's just the framing device of this story of horror and misfortune, who appears at the beginning and the end and kind of, sets the bounds of it.
He becomes almost more of a force, I would say, as it does go on. Like there's a really interesting issue where it's just the entire thing is someone running down the stairs of a building while somebody is jumping to their death outside it, and all of this is sort of happening just because the Ice Cream Man is near. And then like around the cowboy in black, like when whatever is around him, like there is more order, or just like like it's a weird, like almost Lost, if like I don't remember Lost at all, but like isn't there like a Jacob and there's sort of like an anti my lost heads here? Yeah, I don't know. There's sort of this weird, the physical embodiment of entropy or something. I don't know. It's
the Man in Black and Jacob. If I'm remembering correctly from Lost.
Okay.
It's good and evil, but the good isn't necessarily good.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's not in this volume.
No, and I'm sorry for doing that. I just like it's hard to talk about even just like chapter 1 of it because there's so much.
So is it volume 4 where we get the extra issue of the world where it gives us a 4 or 5 page timeline connecting every
East of
story
West
together?
humor.
A town layout like it's a D&D campaign.
And
Jonathan
the tables
Hickman
showing the power levels of
Yeah,
Ice Cream Man and Caleb.
Yeah, it's Jonathan Hickman and Chris Ware did it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about issue 2, which is a couple who are strung out on heroin, and the guy is junk sick on the couch, and she wants to go out and score, and she does it in a pretty terrible way thanks to the Ice Cream Man, and nothing goes very well.
Those conversations were on point. The writing and the way that they had those conversations was like, I absolutely felt like what I was doing. I was watching two people who are being controlled by a substance, just needing to get what they need. And that was a pretty disturbing part of it.
Yeah.
The writing style just like changed so much just when they were talking to each other, which I thought like really gave you a look into what they were experiencing.
And I think that the voice that the writer uses for her in this issue is what made me realize that there was something really special about the comic, because she doesn't talk like other people. She's narrating the whole thing, but she's not really good with words. And she mentions that, but he shows it a lot in really subtle ways. And I was really impressed with that when I read it the first time. Just like, this is definitely not anybody else that's in this story narrating for us right now.
And and everything in the boxes, it's vague on whether or not this is actually a letter. It starts off, "Dear Jimbo, my sweet nice Jim," or if it's just her internal monologue. And the entire thing is just one big run-on sentence with no capitalization, and it's in this what's the term? Stream of consciousness. That is just completely drug-addled.
Yeah, it was really uncomfortable to read.
Uncomfortable, but simultaneously you're really getting to know the real her. In a kind of affectionate way, but in a very uncomfortable way as well.
In ways, it reminded me a lot of how Bendis can write, with the repeating words, but in like an effective way, when you can actually pause and like feel like that's actually how a person be like, that would have you how. I mean, we joke about it, but it is an effective thing that people really do. And I like how it was able to build character of this person that you're just seeing pictures of and seeing their emotions on their face, but able to really like understand, like Django said, their vocabulary. And then the stream of consciousness thing, like Mike said, you can tell the drug addledness, and I like that you can get a sense of the characters through that.
I think often when you see, Bendis is pretty darn good at it, but I think often when you see comic book writers overtly try to match verbal speech, you can tell that they have a sentence that they would have written in a novel in their head, and then they kind of adapt it to like, what would that sound like if it was coming out of somebody's mouth? This issue sounds like he was just listening to a person say all of this.
And the way that you watch them slip into their addiction, I think was really graceful. Like you think of them, I think, as people who have kind of trapped themselves in this situation rather than just like dirty drug addicts. It's not a caricature of these people who are going out to score. It's somebody you're like, oh man, that sucks that you're in that situation, and you kind of want her to make good choices in order to make a bad choice. You don't want her to end up where she ends up in there.
No one's like, the villain of their own story. They're all the hero of it. And drug addiction is one of those things, like no one gets into it to end up like that. So to watch how you can or just that sort of that idea of like, we're just going to do this one more time and then we're going to Arizona, and like the chasm of reality that exists between this metaphorical one last time, you know, and then what you're talking about actually doing on the other side of it is like, you know, you can say one last time every day for 6 years or something. It's and like the chasm of reality.
Oh God, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I had to hear myself. I assume that this all goes into some sort of like auditory black hole where the issue 2 of Ice Cream Man is.
Buddy, I was trying to tag Maxwell Prince.
Oh, but
trying
it's
to get him to show
apart.
up here.
Oh, now we're gonna have this in it.
That's what Django's farts sound like. He just farts Jeff's podcast audio.
Jeff, on that note,
yeah.
Do you, with that one last fix, do you think she was taking that one last hit before she was arrested and she thought this is my last hit, or do you think she knew she was going to OD?
I think that like the romantic idea of thinking you'll OD is something I like that, but no, in reality, like as I was reading it, my thought was like, man, I guess I could see being like, I'm going to be locked up for X amount of time, so I might as well try and be high for as long of that as I can, and it's going to be really uncomfortable trying to talk to like I played out, you know, the horrible scenario of under the way of assuming that was just sort of like, well, I'm getting arrested, so screw that. I guess I might as well be high for as long of it as I can.
That's bummer. Yeah, that level of opioid addiction as well. It's all escapism. It's you know, you're escaping into the drugs, so it's
yeah. And but then in its beautiful kind of catastrophic way, that one last fix, her, you know, her story was a self-fulfilling prophecy because that one last fix, you know, did set him free at least.
Well, at the end, don't they kind of imply she's talking from heaven or some sort of positive afterlife? Yeah. And then I'm thinking about in the 4th issue, the son who keeps saying, "Am I in hell? Am I in hell?" Just kind of thinking of the bookends there. Again, kind of that lack of cause and effect. Like, who do you think's a good person or a bad person, or what happens to them because of it?
Yeah, I honestly got the vibe at the end of this volume that he was not going to stay sober after he threw that coin in the fountain.
Yeah, that was my thinking as well. And I think that an interesting side note about this series, and while there are not really recurring characters, you know, there are issues in this series where someone will be walking through a park and you can see this couple sitting on that bench that they love, or like there are visual things embedded throughout the whole series that like push that all of this is happening at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that like the dog surgeons show up in the background of somebody else's personal hell in
all the time. Like it is interesting how much of like this issue you just see happening in the backgrounds of other issues. But I don't know. Addiction, man. It's a crazy thing that doesn't make sense until you're in it, and then it's kind of the only thing that makes sense. And it's
I'm just glad you kicked tiki drinks this week.
I know, buddy.
And you're down to just regular old whiskey.
I don't smoke cigarettes either anymore.
A thing I just noticed though, so from pages 2 through 4 in this issue, in the 2nd issue, like look at how color is being used. It's genius. I just noticed it on a second glance through there that it's all bright colors when they meet each other. Everything else is black and white. And then, but over pages 4 and 5, look at how the color slowly bleeds out of them through each panel until everything is just black and white.
I think it's
really subtle, really clever.
Yeah, I think that is such a great skill to use when talking about addiction, because, you know, like I think somewhere in like the definition of it, it's like it's slowly removing the joy and enthusiasm of everything in your life and only finding that in one certain thing. And I think that so much of their addiction is like chasing this history together and these things together. So it's almost like color is being used to show significance or what is emotionally important to them.
Right, because first it's each other, and then the first hit, everything is in color, and then it's the inability to experience new joy and instead chasing the previous experiences.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah.
On that art note, does anyone think that the art adds, and if so, why? Rather than just being like, it feels right, I don't think anybody probably dislikes it.
I love it.
I love it. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Did anyone else think that the style is very much like Steve Dillon's?
Yeah, it's like if Steve Dillon and Frank Quietly,
Preacher rather.
Yeah, Frank Quietly had a baby. Like they would do this kind of stuff. I like it because it's, gosh, I don't know. It's a little bit too real and too not real at the same time. It's not cartoony at all, but it's definitely drawings. And it's not, gosh, I don't know. I got nothing. I love this artist. I think that they bring violence to places that don't have violence. Like just sitting on the couch looks a little bit violent in these comics. And
Emily,
I'm a sucker for that.
I'm curious. I'm not super aware. I mean, I recognize you from the store, of course, but I'm not super aware of which books that you have like read and love, or which artists are big fan. You're a big fan of. Like, so if you had never read Ice Cream Man before, like I'm interested in what this art feels like to somebody who might not, and I don't know again exactly the things that you love, but it's a pretty unique. It's got an ooky thing going for it. I'm really fond of how kind of almost grotesque everything is in it. But I'm curious what it felt like to just sort of open a book and see this art.
Yeah, it's funny because when Mike was talking about comparing it to other things, I was thinking usually how I describe it to people is like, oh, I've never read anything like this. But then he brought up Hellblazer and early Sandman, and I can totally think of some psychedelic scenes in those. And those are kind of in my like early comics enjoyment blueprint that I definitely I think both those series did some sort of like 60s trippy kind of wavy gravy sort of scenes. Definitely relate to those in the third one. And those series both honestly have just like really scratchy art at first. But this feels like that if you fleshed it out till it, like you said, it's not cartoony, but it's definitely drawings. So yeah, that I didn't really put my finger on it till Mike said it, but that's kind of what the bell rings for me.
Yeah, like, and a thing that it always stands out to me is like, and on like his Twitter account or whatever, he'll oftentimes post pictures of him inking his penciled work, and I like, that's just like visual ASMR or something for me. Like, I just love watching people like put fine line over pencil line. But how many dots he like puts into like skin wrinkles and skin dimples and like cigarette burns, or as the drug addicts, or sort of like the skin is deteriorating, the way that he conveys that is, it's all so gross, and it's a kind of thin line European looking style, but it's not immediately unlike anything I've ever seen, but at the same time it's kind of immediately unlike anything I've ever seen. I'm just curious how it falls on other people.
I think it's similar to Steve Dillon in that
I agree very much.
He gets a lot of emotion across without a ton of lines or shading. There's not a lot of shading in this art, and you can tell what people are thinking just from one picture. And that's something that whether you like him or hate him, Steve Dillon was able to do that really, really well. And I think that Martin Morazzo is catching up to Steve Dillon on that. So issue 3.
On that Morazzo note, I think
favorite one.
3 was your favorite?
Same here, by the way.
Okay.
On the Morazzo note, I think it's pretty rad that I don't ever remember in any of these 4 issues looking at a face and being like, I could tell that eye should have been a little bit bigger or anything like that. It's somehow very precise, but it's ooky and weird.
Well, and he also drew She Could Fly, right? Which it kind of has a similar feel to Ice Cream Man, although it's a 4-issue or a 6-issue series. It's about a bunch of things, but one of the characters has
compulsive
like,
thinking, compulsive
OCD kind of stuff going on, and she just imagines the most horrible thing she could do at any given moment, and you see it kind of from first person, so you see her doing these horrible things to her family, and then she snaps back. and his art in that is really effective in a similar way to this.
I believe that.
Yeah. So issue 3 follows Bud Hickey, who is he was a one-hit wonder in the 50s. He had a rock and roll song called Rockin' All the Time, right? Rock All the Time. And he never was able to get a second song. It shows at one point, it shows one of the back of one of his other albums. And every single other track says rock.
Yeah.
It made me think of like Chubby Checker, and he did the twist. And then I don't know if you guys know this, but he also did a song called Let's Twist Again. It wasn't nearly as good. He never hit the twist again. And so this
bummer stuff.
Yeah.
Bummer stuff.
Yeah. Like that's the real horror in life, right?
It is, yeah. Like issue 2 is this sort of like horrific example of when you let vice get the best of you, and then issue 3 is like all of my nightmares about maybe achieving something and realizing I'm a farce and I'll be trapped in my own definition of myself and never able to do anything again.
You just be the guy looping on wishing you could have written another good song, sitting in the malt shop 30, 40, 50 years later. Anyway, he gets drafted by these people who are fighting the ice cream man kind of in his own dimension. And it's Ruby Tuesday and Eleanor Rigby and Captain Jack and Rocky Raccoon and Major Tom and Ziggy are all characters that are fighting Conehead, who is the ice cream man who's kind of subjugated the world. And they're trying, they need Bud Hickey to write a new song to beat the ice cream man. And I don't think he does it. I think he just plays his same old song and
his
they
song
lose.
Sucks.
Yeah.
It's kind of telling that this issue is one that's good old vanilla. Yeah.
Okay.
It's just standard. Yeah.
Yeah,
like
for
that.
sure. And he's like, his name is Bud Hickey. He looks like Buddy Holly, right? Like his character, he's got the big old glasses. That's Buddy Holly. But he's got elements of other 50s rockers. And when we finally get to the world, like they fly around in the yellow submarine, he's playing the Hendrix Stratoblaster to try to beat the bad guys. And at some point they say, let's see, the Major Tom says, GC, get us out. And they get transported up into the yellow submarine.
Yeah, I think they refer to that as ground control.
Okay. Yeah. I was racking my brain. I thought it was George Clinton.
Oh, that would be fun.
Yeah, this was one that read like, homage to Kieran Gillen in my head because it's just puns and music references.
I listened to Space Oddity while reading this. I think because I think when you guys read this, Jeff listened to Space Oddity while reading this, and it was great. During the countdown, I highly recommend, like, just it fits with just the flow of the battle and everything.
Yeah, this one is interesting because we have issues like the second issue for sure is like very grounded, very of human interaction. There are issues later on in the series, but there are issues that are like way out there and sort of don't seem to have any bearing in sort of the immediate physical reality around us. And this one is very like between the two. And that's certainly not a criticism of it, but I think I like the ones where I have a little bit easier time placing things, which seems weird for me to say because like that seems like on our podcast, like Django, it's more like his thought there. But like, I'm very fine if we're like, oh, this is just crazy out there, like space stuff. But then here I'm like, is he dreaming? Is he not dreaming? Who are these? Like, I liked that one, but it was almost like I wanted it to pick a lane, but it wasn't. I don't know. I had a slightly mixed sentiment.
How did they flip us? Because this is one of my favorites.
I mean, I'm not saying I don't like it. It was fun in a different way, but it lacked a sort of immediate relatability for me, even though there's a very core nut there that is there.
I'm with you too. Like I mean, this resonated with me probably the least, but like I've been fascinated listening to everything you guys have said about it, and a lot of it's kind of changed my tune and appreciation for the third one, but I came into this conversation thinking like the third one, just kind of dismissing it. But you know, tonally, it definitely plays a big role. But it's still, like you said, it feels a bit disjointed compared to the other three stories, and maybe that serves a bigger purpose, you know, longer term on the different directions that all the stories can go. But it didn't resonate with me the same way. But it's interesting, just every one of these stories, you know, one of you guys said earlier, like we have a different, you know, connection to different things that have happened in every one of the issues, and there was just nothing in this one that was really like, oh yeah, this speaks to me on a certain level.
I think it's a really inexplicable, you have to be a unique artist, athlete, something, and we probably don't personally know a person who's crippled by the need that he had in the same way that we might know somebody who has drug addiction. Sure. And if we don't know somebody who has drug addiction, it's very easy to know a person who knows that, or to see it on the news or see a movie about it. And this here, having that intense addiction to trying to just relive your past and be an athlete who played in the NFL for 9 years and then just somehow didn't do anything else with their life, as if they had no life left, is very haunting. Like,
it's scary.
That's tough. And the world of sports is where I have it closer to me, of knowing the amount of, if you get real bored sometime, take a trip down the internet lane of how many absolutely super broke NFL football players there are that made $20 million in 3 years.
But they got all those free concussions.
And I think that's what this issue rides on, is that feeling, but it's in a way distracted by this craft at the end that I think was done really well. But it doesn't relate to what was happening. It doesn't augment what was happening unless you're relying on the whole existential nature of it. And I don't know.
I think maybe what I liked about it is partly because I'm sort of a 1950s music nerd, and come from a musical family, and like a lot of the if you'll pardon the expression, notes in this story hit home for me. I think that I mean they put a character that I can relate to really well in a situation that never interests me, which is a dreamscape. And somehow the characters feeling real, even though they're song characters, those people feeling real pulled me through the mushy kind of, it's tantamount to them walking on a Mobius strip, which makes me shut down every single time.
It's the pun Kieran Gillen thing that Mike said. Like it just was done well for what it was. It didn't have to mean anything. It just was funny.
Yeah, I think the Kieran Gillen comparison actually is very apt, Mike. That hadn't occurred to me, but I think that it feels almost like a Kieran Gillen issue.
What did you think, Jesse?
Oh yeah, Jesse. Yeah, you've been reading Ice Cream Man for a while too. No, is this your first one? You have a very varied catalog of books that you get. You get things like all over the board, and sometimes you get the like deeply messed up books like Ice Cream Man.
Yeah, I don't usually get horror. Horror. This is the first time reading this kind of thing. It's not exactly my thing. I like to control how I feel a little bit more. But what I found fascinating is how I think he tried to subtly link things. For instance, he put this, the third issue after the second one that was all about drug addiction. And then he put this one, which I think if you look at it is a subtler form of addiction, but it is still addiction. You just don't think about it like that, because he is chasing that next song. He's chasing the fame and that feeling of adoration that he had, and he'll do anything to chase it, but he doesn't necessarily even know how, and he just leads a sad existence because he doesn't know what else to do.
I love your statement about like having a desire to have more control over how you feel, because that is exactly like, there are books of this, like where issues of Ice Cream Man where I'll open it and I'll be like 2 pages in, and it's just like, this goes way too close to like an emotional nucleus that I don't have control over, and I don't know what I'm going to feel or think 15 minutes from now if I keep doing this. I'm just going to put it away. So I totally relate to that. Did you read She Could Fly?
Didn't.
Okay. I was trying to think of like, I feel like I have some familiarity with you and this artist, but I feel like She Could Fly is sort of similar in that
I
school.
looked at it and it looked really interesting, but once again, I don't really go for the emotional grabbing books too much.
Yeah.
I mean, that one looked a little too intense.
It's
really
super
good.
intense, super triggery, intense stuff for sure. But yeah, same artist and just really weird stuff.
It's interesting, Jesse, because the thing that I look for in comics is to lose control of my emotions. To let
losing control of your bowels is what you look for, Django. It's all farts.
I can do that
with you.
anytime I want, Jeff. But I like it when a creator can make me feel something kind of against my expectations or just out of the blue. If I'm reading something and I'm like, oh, that's really sad, and I start to tear up, I'm like, all right, fine, you get a 10 for this stupid comic that I didn't think I would like at all, that I was just reading out of some sort of Jeff told me I should read it, and I
for sure. Also, sounds like you've never had a panic attack.
None of your goddamn business.
Because you have one of those and you get scared of your feelings for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and that's kind of I guess that's probably part of why this issue got me, is because I can kind of relate to the idea that like one of my fears is, what if I've already done all of the good, cool things that I can do, and everything else is kind of downhill from here.
So this issue is like right in line with that.
Yeah, this issue hit a lot of pressure points for me, and I like this issue quite a bit.
Yeah.
It probably didn't get me as deep as the next issue.
Let's get to the next issue, Django. Let's get there.
Nice segue.
Let's get in and just sort of like get in this inflated kiddie pool of emotions that sat under a tree for too long, and now it just got like mud. And
so first of all, the pattern that's on the thing is a skull and booze and roses. It's like a funeral, but also they're little skulls, which I thought was really cool.
Well, it's a tombstone that's in the middle of the main ones.
Yeah. No. The whiskey glass and the roses and the whiskey bottle make their own little skull right there, and then there's also a skull on the tombstone. So it's like little visual puns. This one follows a guy who's getting ready to go to a funeral for somebody that he was friends with a long time ago. And he goes to the funeral and meets up with the guy's dad, who at some point had left. And the guy who's going to give the eulogy at the funeral, he leaves his pregnant wife at home to do it. And they have a conversation, him and the dad, kind of after the funeral, they have a conversation about whether or not this guy should leave his family, because the dad left his family and left the dude's friend all alone with the mom. And man, it was like a lot of really complex family stuff kind of mashed together, and then it ends in this super grisly, like, oh, all right, well, you want to give your kid a hug, let's go to his grave and pull him out of the coffin, and you can give him a hug because they're not going to bury him till tomorrow. And that was pretty wild. And then at the end of this, like structure wise, I felt like the very end of this issue, it's 2 or 3 pages, and it's just the ice cream man talking to this cowboy, and it's obvious that we've met the antagonist of the ice cream man. It felt almost like they tagged that on to the end in order to extend the story a little bit. And I think that there were like 3 months between issue 4 and 5, if I remember right. So like
the book was not going to be an ongoing halfway through this volume, and then it got turned into one. So
I really liked the question that the guy posed, like, hey, I don't know if I want to be a dad, and I'm thinking about leaving my pregnant wife, and you did it when your kid was like 6 or 7. Like, what do you think? And I think it's an interesting, like, the way that the main guy and the dad meet is over his friends and the dad's son's death, and to have him realize that the only way that he could ask somebody this question is to ask this guy who had obviously affected his friend's life. It was just a really interesting set of relationships, and like if you tried to map that out on a piece of paper, it would get Hickman-esque pretty quickly.
I love this issue. What I love, I love this one, especially like, actually this one worked really well for me having read the whole volume in one sitting, because after like volume 2, I really did have this like very existential, like Jeff's always on the borderline of an existential crisis, but that idea of like, how many things that are consistent in my life right now do I actually want to keep doing? And that's a tempting thought always in my mind, and it always has been, and
always
has been my entire life. And that the older mentor figure, not a mentor with quote, but like being able to like express the counter argument to that, the only way you can really value, I think, someone's input in that situation is to actually have done it and felt remorse about it or regret about it. It worked well with the flow of the whole volume, but it also worked aside from the like 2-page interlude that is messed up, and I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on what they think was going on there,
like the sun and maybe hell, maybe not.
Yeah, aside from that, it had like fond, warm, positive emotion undercurrents to me. It was sort of like, because I do think life, so oftentimes, if you find yourself willing to open up and reach out to whatever is around you, life will provide you people that will give you lessons that you need to learn. And the whole like sort of stumbling on to the father of his friend at the funeral like felt very true to me. Like that's how life works in my experience. And yeah, it just spoke to like the amount of really deep connection that you can have with somebody without them being somebody that you talk to every day, and sort of just leaving yourself open to insight and input from other people. I really like the message that one put forward, except for the maybe like stuffing him in hell till the point of breaking. Like that was like a little 2-page reprieve from the
dogs cutting out his brain and robots or skeletons tickling him to death after death. What did you guys think?
Counter to the last issue, this one resonated with me on so many levels that I can't even articulate it, from losing friends or family to the stresses of married with children life, and kind of everything in between, losing a parental figure and things like that. It just hit me on so many levels, and I think that's what, when I finally finished the book, it was just, that's what left everything sitting so heavy. It was really well done, but like you said, it's hard to articulate it, but just so many little pieces of it just hit you and stab you in all sorts of different ways and make you feel things you didn't want to. But I don't know, I kind of like that. I kind of like being taken on that roller coaster like Django does, just to kind of be forced to feel all these things that in my everyday life, as I go through this stuff, I bottle it up and I put it away. And so it's nice to have that kind of catharsis to come and just pull it out of you and make you feel it and make you think about it a little bit, and put some retrospect on your life. And it was good. It's good.
This is also a stop and think book for me, like Will, and we're in like relatively similar life situations just with kids and stuff, and I think that's part of why this works. It's just like, all right, things happen, life is actually a big deal, even though I guess I'm told that it's not at all in the same 2 pages, but still.
And see, I'm in a similar spot to you guys, but 20 or like 12 years later. And so like I have a totally different perspective on this conversation, but I can relate to it pretty closely. Like, what am I doing? I have kids. I have so many kids.
So yeah, so when I mentioned earlier that like this feels like Image trying to do a Vertigo book, this was the issue where I could point to the things that really made that the case, like breaking into the coffin so the dad could hug his son. You're not sure how to feel about that. It's hugging a dead body, but at the same time, it's this emotional connection for this guy.
He needs it.
That could have, that's the kind of scene that could have happened in Sandman or Hellblazer. And
I think it did happen in Hellblazer.
Right. Yeah, tons of stuff like that happened in Hellblazer. And, simultaneously, the son's being tortured in a type of hell.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's Vertigo all over. But the existential angst, dread that you're talking about, Jeff. That's core Jean-Paul Sartre. That's and it's the issue that the younger the father to be is having is that dread feeling of absolute agency and choice. He could leave his wife and abandon this child. There's nothing stopping him.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I feel.
We are all in complete control of ourselves, and if we thought about that all the time, we would be paralyzed. We'd be crippled with anxiety over it. So most of us don't think about that all the time. We go through well-trod paths and what we think is expected of us and all this kind of stuff. That's existential horror at its core, is that.
Existential horror at its core is the awareness of one's own agency and the crippling fear about what they should be doing with that agency. Because that is totally how I feel all the time, and like a crippling, paralyzing fear. So, and do you feel like the salve for that is to like remove a sense of your own agency? Do you feel like it is to do the things that are assigned of us?
Jean-Paul Sartre would say no. The salve to that is accepting that you have agency and control, and kind of working through the anxiety over it, confronting the fear about it, and just kind of accepting that you actually are choosing your own course in life.
Yeah.
Even if it is to just kind of, I'm just going to go to work each day, but be aware that you are choosing that, because you're choosing it no matter what.
Right.
It's
the burden,
it's the delusion of
the burden of agency, though, like, because I can make this choice, should I? It's like, it's more comfortable to do this, but maybe I should do this. It's like, every day, am I running away from my kid? I don't know. No.
I'm excited to read more issues of this. I've only read each issue once, I think, and looking at these these 4 issues, if you cast out the first one as if it's a pilot episode, the theme here is regret, whether it's something that you regret or whether it's a regrettable decision that you've made. And I think that the issues 2, 3, and 4 fall into that category. And I kind of wonder if that's not sort of where he settles with everything. And I think that that's something that everybody can relate to some extent. And if he's just showing things that could trigger regret over and over and over in these series, but from different angles, I think that eventually he's going to really hit a nerve with every single person. And like the comic Crossed, which came out from Avatar, is just like disgusting gore porn, like horrible comic. And I read probably 60 some issues before I found something and I was like, oh God, that's too far.
You got to find your core, though, everyone.
Yeah, but some people find that in like the first 3 pages, and some people find that in the first 20 issues. And I think that Ice Cream Man has something in common with that, in that there's something in this series to really get under everybody's skin. There's something that's going to get its hooks in you, and it the music one might not affect some people, but it might really fuck up some other people.
Because I would say that in these first 4 issues, there hasn't been anything that really affected me on a full emotional level. I enjoyed it. I loved the craft of it, but nothing gave me, chills up my spine or whatever.
We'll get there.
And again, me comparing exactly. So I'm kind of looking forward to finding which issue is the one that was designed specifically to just freak me out.
Yeah,
I really love like the Neapolitan issue. There's an issue, I can't remember which number it is. I think it's in volume 2, but it's just a silent issue that shows 3 different timelines. It's a great, if anyone only reads one more issue of Ice Cream Man, quote unquote, read the silent issue, which we'll post somewhere at some point. But talking to all of you guys before we go, I just want to say, like, in hearing everyone talk about it in different ways, I sort of made concrete in my mind an idea of just this, when you remove, like when you are in this existential realm of things, and when you remove strict causality from things, I think that it kind of forces the reader to abandon a lot of like the paradigms that they bring into anything.
That's good, man.
When you remove like really strict ideas of why a thing happens the way that it does, I think that it requires the reader to be a little bit more vulnerable in the space in which they're engaging with it. And it says that like, okay, the paradigms that I've built up about how things don't work here. And I think it's, it's like forced mushrooms for, reading or something. It kind of cuts the grass and it makes people be just a little bit more vulnerable with it. And that's just a thought that happened in sort of hearing Mike and Nathan talk. And I love fiction that does that. I really do love kind of boldly going where, like abandoning the thing, the maladaptive way that my brain has decided to view reality. Anytime we can break that down is good.
Doesn't force you to decide whether you're being an empath all the time. It kind of like rattles the cages enough to where you get to observe, and it doesn't make you feel like you have to have feelings about each individual thing. And maybe that's a comfortable reason why I can continue on with these pretty heavy topics every time.
Yeah.
Cool.
And in terms of like abandoning narrative paradigms, here's the thing to consider walking away. Is Ice Cream Man a villain? Does he actually do anything that is, outright villainous?
I totally had
He
it in my
presents
head.
people
So I think
choices.
it's right on the back of the book before I even read it, but they describe him as a trickster, and that's just like such a useful way to think about it. Then the point's just chaos. It's not like any certain outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think at some point, maybe in volume 3, we get a little bit of origin with him, and I don't know if it answers that really.
But it does. Yeah, please.
The interesting point about tricksters in almost every mythology is that they trick for a reason. Usually that reason is to teach a lesson.
Mm-hmm.
So then the question is the Ice Cream Man trying to teach these people a lesson, or is he trying to teach the readers a lesson or show them a possibility of a lesson? And if so, what is that lesson?
He seems really bad at teaching the characters lessons because they're either dead or completely messed up by the end.
But I like that because
really hitting the point.
Yeah, and that feeds into sort of like in when Mike talking about like the crypt keeper, the idea of the person ushering in the story and then saying goodbye as you leave it. It sort of frames it in the way of like it is like maybe a trickster deity or somebody who's actually trying to teach a lesson by showing you the macabre, gray, ashy existence that we all live in.
I love the idea that he's teaching us a lesson, the readers.
Yeah. Is this just the shadow, or is this like like a bandit type of a mask? Because that was kind of like, I keep looking at it over and over, and I'm like, is it shadow? But I mean, with that vein of like kind of a trickster, kind of got like a bandit, kind of a mask of, whether
I was
it's
wondering
the
same thing too, because
the way
I felt like as it went
nose.
on, it got like he got darker.
Yeah,
he had more shadow, more evil look, or
right. He like, gets even darker on the next one.
Well, pull that page up again. The Ice Cream Man faces above that are super quietly. The one on the right side, the nose. Holy shnikey, that looks like.
I do agree. This artist pulls a lot from that Frank Quitely school.
Except he draws lips.
Yeah.
You don't even know what lips look like, Django. You wouldn't know about Frank Quitely art.
I don't have to. I'll let my colorist do it.
Yeah,
is a good one. I like the Ice Cream Man in the background receding into and bending the metal. Yeah.
He's even doing that on the bandit mask page too. He's kind of bending the metal.
Oh,
right there.
Yeah, he does not like that cowboy. Yeah. Well, does anybody have any other further thoughts before we get on out of here? Anybody at all? So grateful that everyone read this and showed up to talk about it.
I'm excited to read more. I had trade copies 2, 3, and 4 loaded up in a cart at like 1 o'clock in the morning with my finger hovering over the order button. I was like, I need to pause this. I need to pause this for a second.
We're delivering tomorrow,
messed
buddy.
me up worse for sure.
What's that, Emily?
Volume 2 messed me up worse. It was way more intense for me. But like you said, everybody has different hot button issues. But yeah, that one. I read it all at once. That was maybe a bad choice.
I think I'm with you there. I think that Volume 2 gets like there's just haunting things that have stuck with me. Yeah.
Same.
I think this series just gets better and better.
It does.
Somehow 18 or 21 issues in, I'm still reading it and still affected by issues. And it's probably the best thing that comes out whatever week it comes out. And like I don't know. It's really interesting being somebody who reads as many stories as Jeff and I do. And kind of at some point you start seeing the bones of stories, and the bones of this story are so kind of mutated and different than the bones of other stories. And I think that it's because they had a successful thing and had more happen than they expected. And you get a totally different rhythm and a totally different kind of thrust of the entire series than you would have if they'd said, okay, we're going to do a 48 issue series about this guy.
Well, it speaks even to Mike's point of like kind of feeling like a Vertigo series, because a lot of those things, like in the 90s and early 2000s when Vertigo was putting out comics, they really would say, all right, you write this for a while. Like they baked in as
a 6 or 60 issues.
Yeah. And like, they don't do that with comics anymore. So like Ice Cream Man is a really weird gift that everyone is given because so many people have jumped on, like, and it has defied the way that, sales of a thing really work. It's a kind of thing that I think its mission statement probably was not what it ended up being. And it only got to be this because it was allowed to be this. So
yeah,
it's a cool type of comic book stuff. It's the kind of thing that I really wish was more present in the comic industry and really isn't allowed to be anymore because of the way sales work.
What do other store owners say about this? Either
Django,
on their
has
own
anyone
perspective?
Does anyone have we ever talked to anybody about Ice Cream Man? Really, I can't.
Know. Do other store owners read comics? I really can't tell.
Many others don't. Like we gathered with a bunch of them recently, and our thing was just sort of like, how many store owners don't read comics anymore? A lot of them don't. Yeah.
I know that sales on this series are pretty good, and Image stands by it more than they stand by some other series.
20% of Batman.
Yeah.
25% of Batman.
25% of Batman, which is amazing for a series that's not Saga, or written by Kieran Gillen and published by Image starting 6 years ago, and also called Wicked and Divine. Yeah, I don't know what other store owners think, but it seems to be a series that is working well for comic book readers. And we push the hell out of it at the store because I think it's a really rewarding thing. And like I said before, one of my paradigms for a good story, a good comic, is something that makes you feel feelings. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find an issue of this that didn't make somebody feel feelings
and feel their own feelings, like their own. You do your own stuff with, like, they send you an ambiguous ball of jagged things and then you make feelings around it. So, listen, Hannah, Jesse, Emily, thank you so much for being here. New people this week. That's so great. I wish Wynn could have also been here. Matt as well. They'll hopefully be here next time, but I'm so glad to have more people here than the previous week. And then the previous week before that. What an amazing thing. So thank you all, everyone, for being here, for reading these books, for ordering them, for letting us bring them to you when we pick a new one. Our next week, or well, not next week. Next week, we're going to be doing East of West Volume 5, continuing that linear train. Volume 4. Excuse me.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt with my fingers.
No. I got a lot of it. But the following week, we're going to be talking about Skyward Volume 1. So we're trying to sort of, bounce it off of maybe not so emotionally disturbing as Ice Cream Man, and then it's a safe bet that Gideon Falls will be the next one.
Oh God, I was just going to say that.
Dark Train.
If anybody needs something that's going to make you feel gross, similar to the way Ice Cream Man may or may not have made you feel gross, like Jeff and I mentioned earlier, Stray Bullets is something that you have to take in very small doses.
Nihilism.
Yeah, and I don't think that we could possibly do a book club on that because
no,
I read these a couple hours before we do this, and I would just be a puddle of stress if I tried to read 6 issues of that before this.
Yeah. But yeah, it lightens my whole day to see you all. So thank you so much for doing this, and I can't wait to see you all again soon, at least next week. But anyway, thanks you all.
Feelings mutual. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye,
Very well.
everybody.
Hey, thanks, guys.